Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on the question of whether The Good Place is actually a comedy or not. We're hoping you're enjoying your Balticon, and remind you that you can submit your questions through the Q&A function. Please keep it PG, as we have some young people with us today. We ask you also to be aware that we've had requests that we not include spoilers in the discussion or the chat with regard to season 4, because that has not become available on Netflix yet. We will have spoilers in the discussion for season 1 and the end of season 1, and possibly for some of the other stuff that is available on Netflix. After the discussion, after we're done, please feel free to continue on the Discord channel if you wish to continue the chat. Right now, I think I'd ask the panel members to introduce themselves and talk about what their interest is in The Good Place. My name's Bob Oliver. In my day job, I work for the Air Force, and I watch a lot of television in the evening, and The Good Place has long been one of my favorite programs. So let's just go in order. Doc, why don't you go first?
Okay. My name is Doc Coleman. I write steampunk comedy adventure, and I was most recently had this book published that's an anthology, Paradise Found, Tales from the Library. It's a collection of stories set in the intersection of all afterlives, which I thought was pretty appropriate for a discussion for The Good Place. I'm a recent recent convert to the show. I've heard about it as being a very good show for a while, and not so much during the quarantine, but earlier this year, I finally got around to it and just found it to be a delightful piece of comedy. And some very insightful philosophy as well.
Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Pinsker. I am a short story writer and novelist. This is my book, A Song for a New Day. I'll put the rest of my info in the chat rather than wasting time with it. I loved this show from the first episode. I don't remember. I think I started watching it from the beginning on the strength of Parks and Rec, which I had also loved. But it quickly became one of my favorite shows. I don't rewatch very much of anything, including this show, I'm afraid. But it's been fairly indelible, and I just love it. So,
Alex?
I'm Alex Wittenberg. I started to watch the show when it came on, and then I stopped, and then it dropped to Netflix, and I picked up from where I left off and got hooked, and got my wife hooked later and rewatched most of the first 3 seasons, and found all sorts of really interesting hints along the way in the first season about the truth. I don't usually watch much in the way of sitcoms. This is like one of maybe 3 sitcoms I have watched in the past decade. And I picked up on it just because, oh, it's Kristen Bell and Ted Danson. They're usually good. Shocker. They're usually good here too.
Brick?
Hi, I'm Brick Barrientos. At this convention, I'm mostly doing the trivia contest. And my interest in The Good Place, I guess from having seen it the first time, somehow Kristen Bell as Eleanor right at the beginning had a little bit of imposter syndrome, I guess the ultimate, and somehow that kind of rung with me the first time, and I think that's what had gotten me hooked at the beginning of the show. And yeah, I think it's a sitcom. I mostly remember it for its laughs, philosophy. Oh, you could go on and on about that, but mostly for the laughs for me at any rate.
All right. Let's just go ahead and jump in on the main question. Do you think it's a comedy? And if it's not a comedy, what is it? And if it is a comedy, what else might it be? Is there anything else we might describe it as other than a comedy? Brick, you've already said you believe it is a comedy. Could it be described as something else in addition to being a comedy?
Well, I mean, it has certain metaphysical elements, and I know some people who have some, very serious and heartfelt feelings about the afterlife, and it actually makes them uncomfortable to watch a show that is not quite their idea of the afterlife, even if it's all for laughs and all theoretical and fictional and all that. And it's not really in their mind. So, no, I can understand how some people might see it and be actually a little threatened, or at the very least uncomfortable with the entire subject matter.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what
It's
might be as well as a comedy? What might?
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, it's a comedy because we're sitting there, we're laughing at it at least some of the time. It is far from a traditional sitcom for two reasons. One is that it's got all the philosophical content that Michael Schur and his people put into it, and have been very open about that. It's the only sitcom I'm aware of where the writers were consulting philosophy professors. And the other thing, although I think it's just been a change in general, is that we've stepped towards this model where even sitcoms have long-running stories and plots and arcs. And to me, having sort of dropped out of sitcoms, finding that it exists in sitcoms is really weird. And it creates a very different feeling in general, that even though you're going to laugh at a lot of it, you approach it differently than you would have approached sitcoms even 10 years ago. And you're finding yourself engaged by the characters and engaged by the plots in a way that's sort of outside of the comedy. Most of what's going on here could probably be done seriously. You wouldn't want to see it necessarily, because I think the comedy is what makes it, makes the philosophy go down well. But it's so different than old school sitcoms in almost every way I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, what's your opinion on this question?
Well, I thought it was interesting when this was posed in the suggestions for panels, that this is the question that's being asked at a science fiction convention, the question of is it a comedy, rather than the question of is it science fictional, which I've also seen people debate, like as it got nominated for Nebulas and Hugos, the question of people were asking, is it either, is it science fictional, to which I think it absolutely is. I think it has dramatic elements, but it is ultimately a comedy. It uses comedy as a vehicle for philosophical questions and ethical questions. But we've mentioned the podcast already, and I have to give a shout out to Neil, who is I know one of the audience members, but who told me to go listen to the podcast. And I haven't listened to much of it, but in the very first episode of the podcast, they said that every episode had to do 6 things. And the number one question that they asked was, is it funny? So I think it is funny. It's hilarious. And I could do an entire panel just on the puns, like the one behind Brick, like all the yogurt puns, and all of the, the shrimp pun, like all of the store names and everything. So I think it's all of those things. And my favorite TV shows always find some balance of those things. If you can make something heavy go down with something light, or lighten, or vice versa, then it's always better.
Doc, what do you think?
One of the things that I noticed was all through the first season, they're always talking about how incredibly boring ethical philosophy is. And the realization that I had is that the show wasn't actually a comedy. It was somebody's attempt to make ethical philosophy entertaining, to have actually put it in a form that people would be interested in, that they would come back and seek out. And looked at it that way, it's actually remarkably successful, because the audience learns, whether they knew anything or about it before, they learn an awful lot about different schools of ethical philosophy.
That's true. That's very true. Let's go with this for a minute, this idea. How successful does everyone think they are in integrating the ethical philosophy into the story and in explaining the ethical philosophy? Doc, why don't you start? Since
Are you talking about us or about the characters?
The characters.
The characters.
Yeah.
Ironically, I think Chidi is the one who has the most difficulty. He's actually studied ethical philosophy. It's what he's built his life around, and he has the most struggles with it. All the other characters in their own way are trying to boil it down to the simplest terms, and once they've done that, they can accept it. Even if they get it horribly wrong, they boil it down to something that they can understand, and they immediately integrate it. Next.
Sarah, what do you think?
I think they do a wonderful job of it. Even if people don't walk away remembering the name of every philosopher connected to every philosophy, I think they do a good job of illustrating different schools of ethics through the actions of characters and the realizations that characters make.
Alex?
My favorite two episodes from the whole series were The Trolley Problem and Jeremy Bearimy, and those are the most soaked in philosophy. Now, I'm assuming there are probably people who felt that the scene where Chidi is explaining various philosophies at the end of Jeremy Bearimy was probably a little too on the nose, but it was such a great episode that by that point, it was going to go down easy. And The Trolley Problem, I think, is just brilliant use of sitcom tropes and the actors to explain a philosophical concept in a way where you're being entertained. And I think people must have walked away from that episode actually remembering what the trolley problem is to some degree. And then, of course, it also just it comes back. So this is sort of like they're teaching us philosophy, they're entertaining us, and they're setting up stuff later in the season. So they didn't always succeed with that, but it just sort of says to me that they usually knew what they were doing.
Rick, what do you think? Rick, can you hear us?
I think that the philosophy goes down, with the comedy. I don't know if I thought about it that much. Maybe I'm an overly ethical person. I don't know, but I always think that's people should act a certain way, and that's and trying to follow what Chidi says. Although I make my decisions a lot better than he does. I reach them, I think.
All right, I have a question here that I think relates to this. What makes the trolley problem episode funny and successful in people's minds? What do you think? How do you think that worked particularly well? Alex, since you brought this up, why don't you address that? What about that episode made it successful and funny?
Well, the funny, I think, just came from illustrating the trolley problem with the trolley and then with the surgery. And it was done sort of like over the top and bizarre and gross. And they took a risk in doing that. But I think those elements, they just brought them together and just like, okay, how does the trolley problem work? And if we actually illustrated it with a real trolley, what would it look like? And wouldn't there be an opportunity for us to be funny organically? Because the characters are all acting perfectly in character for season 2 Michael, who is teetering between demonic and where he ends up. and Chidi being Chidi, and Eleanor being Eleanor, and just sort of the reactions to each of the people there. There was a perfect mix of things. I think you couldn't have done that earlier in the series because Michael wasn't in the right place to do it. And you probably couldn't have done it later because Michael would not have been in that exact place. And then I think jumping from the trolley problem to surgery, just to sort of like not overplaying one thing, but sticking with the concepts. And then you've got another sitcom classic. You're in an operating room. That's always funny on a sitcom, right?
Certainly brings back shades of MASH, at least it did to my mind. Sarah, do you have any opinions about this?
I have to agree with Alex on the reactions. I think the reactions and the whole show is just so deeply grounded in character by that point that it's in knowing how they will react and knowing some of the inevitabilities of that situation. Also knowing that Chidi is, has so much trouble with decisions, which is something that I can actually empathize with. And then putting him literally into that situation, which no doubt he as a character has wrestled with, repeatedly. It's something he's thought about, and then putting him actually in that situation. But then the visceral doing it with blood and just consequences. I think, and somehow still making it funny despite all of that, I think is fantastic.
Doc, what do you have to say on this subject?
I guess part of what makes it funny is that humor is in a certain way a human reaction to pain. It's in order to deal with pain at a certain level, we divert it into humor. That's why you've got shows like MASH where you've got battlefield humor, you've got gallows humor. But this really takes a subject where you're talking about philosophical thought problems and now you're making them real and you don't have time to think. You need to react. And yet the characters are still trying to think things out and it's too late. By the time they're even aware the situation is going on, no, it's too late. We've just killed another dozen people. And there's an irony there that philosophy is supposed to help prepare you for making decisions. And of course, the philosopher is the person who is most indecisive of the entire bunch. It's a study in contrasts and irony, and that's ends up being humor all over it.
Brick, what do you think?
Well, I think I picked what used to name Jeremy. That was taken off at least a little bit off of Doctor Who's timey-wimey. They'd used it to such an extreme extent, and the what they had used with the way time moves. But also a clever way to deal with the fact that the time should only move in one direction, at least to our small mind, that it moves in a wacky direction for all people. So that moves into that crazy shape there. And that was a sort of a great way to explain all that and with it away.
I'm sorry, sir. We can't hear you. You're cutting up. We can't hear you talking. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you try louder, maybe?
Okay.
I don't think it's volume.
Move on to some other moment and see what I can do here.
It doesn't feel like volume at this point to me. I think it might actually be connected.
Yeah, it seems like a connection issue. Well, while we're trying to work out the issue with Brick, let's move on to another question we have here. Roy Pettis submitted this question. two shows about eschatology in one calendar year, Good Omens and The Good Place, both comedies. Does this say something about where we are as a society? Alex, do you want to take a swing at that one?
They're so very different because Good Place bent over backwards and then some to avoid anything resembling religion. There are little moments here and there where I can tell Michael Schur probably was influenced in some way by being Jewish, but it feels so small. And then you go over to Good Omens, and it is very Christian or Christological. And it's like, up to this moment, I didn't really think about the fact that both of them are approaching this. They both end up saying that it's up to people, and that we really shouldn't, the forces beyond us are the forces beyond us, and we make our own decisions in the world. But other than that, I think I need to think about the similarities and the differences a lot more.
Sarah?
I haven't finished the Good Omens TV show yet, and my memory of the book is very vague. But with regard to the question of why is it a comedy, I think comedy is a great vehicle for hiding big questions. I think people are willing to tag along for some of those questions in a way that maybe they aren't ready to do in a serious drama, or there are dramas that do that too, but I think there's the medicine helps the medicine go down type thing, and or to use it like a cooking example, like putting that little bit of salt into something sweet will sometimes enhance it. I think that the funny disguises the bigger questions, and I don't think that he would have gotten a drama about ethics across to the networks. I think there's a question of what sells and what people are willing to believe in, and it's fascinating to hear the stories also of how he was allowed to do it, just because in every way this is a show that you would think that the networks would run away from.
Mm-hmm. Doc, what do you believe?
Well, the fact that Good Omens was out there in print form for many years before they ever made it to a TV show, I don't think any of this really talks about where we are as a society. But it does point out to how comedy allows you to examine very serious subjects in a way that is more friendly and more approachable and less threatening to people, especially since people will definitely dig down and feel like they're being attacked and like they have to defend their own positions in a more serious discussion, especially with regard to religion and what happens after we die. But comedy is, it gives a certain relief valve or at least for most of us, that it is an examination, but it's not a serious examination, that we're not trying to change your philosophy. We're just trying to show different facets. And of course, there are always going to be people who will get upset about the material if it doesn't match their worldview, but it gives an opportunity to examine.
Rick, excuse me, Sarah, just 1 minute. Rick, let's try again and see if we have your connection.
Okay, let's see. I don't know if you can hear me any better now.
Better.
Okay, we'll see what happens. So, yeah, Good Omens was at the same time, and I know I didn't see as many people, I guess since Good Omens had been around for a while, as many people seemed that they were upset about that setup as The Good Place, strangely enough, though. not so much. I guess it's a different sort of humor, and I guess it goes in places that I think we've seen before in the past. The devil, the demon, and the angel being friends, or something. I can't remember, but it seems to be a trope that has gone on before, and I think people are a little more comfortable about that as opposed to alternative versions of simple flags or simple clouds.
Okay, Sarah, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say the thing we haven't brought up at all yet that got a frequent citations in connection was Lost, which is also worth bringing up because I think this succeeded in a number of places that Lost failed, and I actually loved Lost, but I think that this managed to keep its promises, and I'm not without any spoilers. This manages to keep its promises in a way that Lost didn't, and maintain its vision unwaveringly.
All right, that does actually speak to a question that Alec S. submitted. Anything you recommend to watch or read that has similar themes? We've already talked about Good Omens and Lost. I would start this discussion off by recommending a movie, I believe it was from the 1990s by Albert Brooks, starring Albert Brooks, called Defending Your Life, which touches on many of the same themes that you see in The Good Place, although in a more heavy and condensed fashion, being a movie. It is a comedy, but it's somewhat darker, and it piles things on a little bit fast and quick as opposed to how The Good Place deals with it in a more leisurely manner. But I think it is very similar in some ways. Doc, do you have anything you would recommend?
I'll let the other panelists answer so I can think about this more.
Sarah?
Strangely, the first thing that came to my mind is a movie, and I don't know that this comparison will hold up in any way, but it's a movie called Wrist Cutters, A Love Story, which is, on the surface, has some very heavy themes of suicide. It's based on, I think, an Edgar Carrot short story. But it is just a beautiful indie movie, also about choices and lives and afterlives. And I don't want to spoil it in any way, but it also makes good use of humor and joy in a heavy topic.
Alex?
That's a tough question. The first thing that comes to mind, rather strangely, is Groundhog Day. I guess because at some point, The Good Place kind of did dip into the Groundhog Day well, but that has a similar, if somewhat different, approach to the concept of how do you become a good person. It's just a very different mirror. I think it's a reflection of the time that in the 90s, the main character would have to be middle-aged white guy. And that in our time, the main character would have to be a woman, and while we had Michael drifting around, the bulk of the cast was either not male or not white, and it's a reflection of the time. So it's still a similar sort of thing where people are just raising that question, a philosophical question of how can you become a better person, and what does it take to make you a better person?
Britt?
Well, I think, in some senses, both Back to the Future and It's a Wonderful Life. I think thinking about what you've done in the past and looking back over.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, Mr. Barrientos. Could you remove your background and see if we can give you more power to the sound?
While he does that, I'm going to agree with Roy Pettis in the chat that Russian Doll is also a worthwhile connection to me.
Doc, what about, have you thought of something?
Having a chance to think, trying to keep myself from just being distracted by everything that has angel and demon themes, but I think actually a surprisingly good show with similar themes is Lucifer, where the devil has come to Los Angeles for a vacation, and a lot of it is about trying to get the devil to go back to hell and deal with the damned souls. But as you watch through the seasons, a lot of it becomes, what is it that makes you a good person or a bad person, and does it matter what your origin is? Whether an angel can become a bad person or whether the devil himself can become a good person, and how the way you see yourself helps shape your reality. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting show, and it's. I feel like it's well written.
Rick, let's try again now that you have diverted some more power there. See if that helps some. Rick, can you hear us?
Okay, I guess I was talking about the changes that that you do to your life, how they tried to when that season when they did come back to Earth and tried to reconcile with their with the various people in their lives. Eleanor with her mother, and, with her mother, Jason with Joy and Donkey Dog, and with her sister. That was some attempt to say that that you can that you to improve, and that's sort of the things that we all have a second chance, like in It's a Wonderful Life, and then Back to the Future, where we things have changed, but we got a chance to fix that all up.
Mm-hmm. I would add, this is a very heavy film, but it's very beautiful in a cinematic sense. The Robin Williams film, What Dreams May Come, which is based on a Richard Matheson novel that came out in the early 2000s. As I say, it's a very dark and very heavy film, but it does deal in a very beautifully photographed way with many of these issues. Let's move on to another question. Bob Konevsky submitted the question, isn't some of the comedy of The Good Place based on the idea that beings as old as time struggle with contemporary problems the audience recognizes, like struggling with technology, Janet, or the demon's office culture? Alex, why don't you start?
Okay, definitely that is a rich vein for the show, and I think they do it in a way that the audience is going to get, and I think it keeps people engaged, and it did never fail to be funny. Let me just think for a second where I can go. Michael's obsession with the mundane life, even though in the first season it seems to a certain degree that it's a bit of we think in the second season, he was putting it on when he was interested in saltines and paper clips. No, he was interested in all these mundane things. These immortal beings, they're fascinated with everything about humanity. And I think that sort of ends up being part of Michael's arc, is that that's the door to get him in. And we kind of also then see down the line as other characters start to interact with humanity and interact with our struggles. It's like the audience gets it, and it gives the characters something interesting to do, and it sort of just gives them a new layer. And then it also really gives Ted Danson a chance just to be Ted Danson.
Mm-hmm. Doc, what do you think?
To a certain amount, the show does not make any bones about the fact that your demons are these extra dimensional creatures that are as as old as time, but they appear in the format that you see them so that your mind can understand them. And in a certain way, that kind of shapes everything about it. It's like, The Good Place looks like it does, not because this is what heaven looks like, but because this is what you can understand about heaven. So everything is really kind of sifted through the filter of human perception. That's kind of interesting how that looks in terms of technology and demon office culture. It's like, is it really like that? Are there analogous struggles, or is it our perceptions that are creating these issues? It's kind of an interesting philosophical point itself.
It is. Sarah?
I think there's so many levels on which the humor in this show works. I think that that ancient beings trying to understand people aspect, and the Janet aspect, and there's some fish out of water comedy, there's some character-based comedy, there's some really, really farcical visual comedy. There are the puns, the more puns, and even just down to and a lot of it has to do with the actors, but even just the swearing and Eleanor's constant frustration at not being able to swear, but the word, it never ceases to be funny, and I think they've recognized that, and so there's this range of mature comedy to fart jokes that
Let me see
manages.
if I can jump into another computer. So I'll let you for a few minutes and possibly come back, okay?
Okay. All right. I hope you have better luck there, Britt. Sarah, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it just, I think that those are aspects of it, but the comedy for me worked on so many levels, and so much of it was character based. I found that delightful.
One thing that I found interesting was that the different aspects of eternity seem to project themselves through different worldly epochs. The demon's office culture seemed to be sort of a 1950s Mad Men, and the accountants seem to be in the 1980s somewhere. And at what we saw of not spoiling the fourth season, but we'll just say that we saw something else when we got to see people from The Good Place. So I thought that was, and I don't know whether that was intentional or it's just the way it sort of came out in the mix, but it was a very interesting dynamic. You brought up, Sarah, the question of Janet, and Mary McCoy has asked that we talk about Janet's role in The Good Place. What do you think was Janet's function in the story, both in terms of the comedy and in terms of the philosophy? Start with Sarah.
Well, again, having listened to some of the podcasts, it was very interesting to find out that their initial conception of Janet was a kiosk and sort of an Alexa type thing at a kiosk where Eleanor could go to ask questions and get answers. And it was also interesting to hear that they had interviewed actors across a huge spectrum, from 12-year-olds to, every age, every gender, they didn't know what they were looking for. And so I'm again going to go back to the actor creating the character in some way in this case, and they happened to pick an actress who was very skilled at improv, but also got to create the character around her. And I think for me, I keep coming back to character based stuff because it's, as a writer, those aspects are really interesting to me when it's a combination of the show's writers and the actors collaborating infuse the character with more than it was. So to go from a kiosk to such a rich and hilarious character, I think a lot of her humor was in the deadpan of the delivery, I think a lot, and then the differentiation between the different iterations of Janet that we see. So I think that a lot of that credit has to go to the actress.
Mm-hmm. Doc?
Yeah, I definitely get the feeling that Janet started off as kind of a play on Siri. The personal assistant who doesn't quite answer the question that you asked, but still manages to provide information that might be useful later. But it definitely took a life of its own, so to speak, and went to new and interesting places. I guess in some way it kind of speaks to how we feel about technology and about how we will personify technology and believe that it is as alive as we are just because it interacts with us in a certain way. I think that's about all I got.
Alex?
There was so much to love about Janet, and I think most of it just was, like Sarah said, the actress grabbing the character and pulling her in incredible directions. But there was also just this consistency to her that even though Janet grew and was able to have this relationship with Jason, that she was still Janet. It's like she never stopped insisting that she was not a robot. And it's like, I'm always going to think about that, because anytime I click on the not a robot box from Capture, it's like Janet's words echo in my head. She represents the sort of technology that we can't necessarily define, that's always with us, but at the same time, she's her own thing. And while there seem to be an infinite number of Janets, this one stands out. And again, that's the actress. I think it's also the ensemble. The way that she played off Michael, I don't think they saw forming this relationship between Michael and Janet that would endure the whole series. And that was sort of this, I think, brilliant and probably an accident.
I think I would add, and this goes to something that Doc said earlier, the Janet also gave them a way to hint very generally at much deeper mysteries behind what we were seeing. For instance, we never learned actually who made the Janets, or for that matter, who decided that the judge was going to be the judge, for instance. So because of that, I think that was one function she had in the story, was that hinting at a deeper mystery. And the only thing we ever found about that was that one time when Michael was reading from the technical manual and it said, Janet's brought to you by the makers of light, darkness, and everything. But we never actually found out who those makers were. Let's see.
And Brooke is back.
Hi, I'm back.
Hi.
Am I sounding okay?
Girl.
You sound so much
Now
better.
much better.
Okay.
Yes.
Different computer.
We were talking about the role of Janet in the show.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether she was just an easy info dump when they needed it, exposition. But then later on when she and Jason had gotten married, that was like so marvelously absurd that I like. I think they put that on YouTube. I watched that at least a half dozen more times just to go through every bit of it.
Oh, man. What other, I like that idea of a marvelous absurdity, trying to respect our not giving spoilers for season 4. What other what are some of people's other marvelous absurdities that we saw in the show? We'll start with Alex for this.
Tahani. Tahani's endless name dropping and it's like Tahani is a complicated character because she did a lot of good in the world. She raised billions as a fundraiser, and she was still going to go to the bad place. Now, granted, we learned that the system was rigged, but at the same time, I think there was a sort of a commentary through her about motive, and does your motive for doing things matter? And I think she began to think about why she did things in a way she wouldn't have before, but it never stopped being funny. And then it allowed them to mess with things, including a line that I keep thinking of, because for 2.5 seasons, she kept talking about all these people she was friends with. And then she talks about, and then Elon Musk sent his car into space. Why was I ever friends with him? And that was just like this incredibly hysterical moment where I'm not sure if it shows that Tahani is learning or if it's just simply Michael Schur saying, there's some people I can't have Tahani look the other way on. But I keep thinking about that for some reason. Good comedy echoes with you.
Sarah, what do you think?
Oh, I'm actually struggling. The things that keep popping into my head are all in season 4. But I will add the middle place, just as and all the things they come up for the middle place as just nice low key absurdity.
Doc?
I was just thinking in retrospect, when you consider how rigged the system is to send everyone to the bad place, that one person was actually good enough to go to the middle place, and she still wasn't that nice a person.
No, she's terrible.
Yeah, she's an absolutely terrible person, didn't care about anything, and yet she still ends up in the middle place.
I was wondering sometimes whether Schur was actually a Gilbert and Sullivan fan, because he plays off all of these extreme legalisms and what problems they can get you into. And that you see that in a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan plays, how you use these sort of literal interpretations of the law and splitting of hairs to both get into trouble and get out of trouble. One of my favorite quotes from Gilbert and Sullivan is when an attorney in the Gondoliers is saying the ration system is a legal fiction and a legal fiction is a solemn thing that we dare not meddle with. And I thought that would be something that Michael Schur could almost have invented. Britt, do you have any other ideas of marvelous absurdities that are your favorite?
Pretty much. Unfortunately, I know Chidi didn't get too much, but the other three certainly did. Anytime Eleanor would both, especially Eleanor and Jason, the crazy things that they would get into. So yeah, pretty much anything, and how I guess Jason being the personification of the a Florida man person that is always getting into trouble with explosives or something else, or being born underwater. And or have I said something? I can't remember. That's season 4 now.
Well, we do have a comment or a question that Jason was also an example of marvelous absurdity. Why don't we spend a moment talking about Jason's role in The Good Place, because it is linked to Janet's role in some very interesting ways. And Jason seemed to almost in some ways personify the idea you have in some cultures of the holy fool. That is, that he seemed to be completely out of it, but capable of discerning very deep truths sometime. One of my favorites being early on in the first season when he says, I think we're on in a prank show. And later when he finds out what's really going on with the reboots and so forth, he said, I told you it's a prank show. Anyone else want to weigh in on the idea of Jason?
Well,
Why
what you
don't
said
we
about the
start?
holy fool is an interesting point, given that he starts out as a holy man, at
Mhm.
least posing as one. So perhaps that wasn't so wrong after all.
Yes. Alex?
Jason is the nicest person. He has absolutely no moral compass, and we ultimately get a sense as to why. But he's a nice person, and he doesn't have any interest in harming people. And he's sort of like the balance of someone like Eleanor, Eleanor doesn't want to harm anybody specifically either, but Eleanor is never nice when we first meet her. Eleanor doesn't know how to be nice, and Jason is like, they're in the same place, but they're coming at it from such different places that having someone like Jason around, I think, really offered the show a bit of a balance. At the same time, he's just the level of stupidity he is, and also just the endless running Jacksonville Jaguars gags, which I, as a football fan, I just sort of loved in the fact that the show rolled with the punches in terms of Blake Bortles not being on the team and throwing in other references and just having fun with it. Because Michael Schur is a sports fanatic.
Sarah?
I got distracted during this question because I started thinking, and I don't know if this bears out, but I started thinking when you said the holy fool, I started thinking about the Jewish concept, the four children in the Passover Seder,
Mm-hmm.
and you can probably map Chidi onto the wise child, and you can probably map Jason onto the one who doesn't know how to ask. And I was just trying to figure out who is who of the other two, and whether that actually completely worked. And I got distracted. But I might have to think about that more. But yeah, Jason is just so pure and ridiculous that he does make a great foil for the others. And again, a lot of that comes down to the actor and that he had, and the things that he had to sell in the first season and then turn around. But yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking now. So
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask Doc to answer this and then give everybody a chance for their final thoughts. Doc?
Okay. What I think is kind of interesting about Jason is that when he keeps his mouth shut, things go well for him. The whole time he wasn't speaking, everyone thought that he was wise and deep, and they did good things for him. They may not have been the things he wanted, but they did good things, and things kind of progressed for him. Once he started talking to people, everything fell apart.
I'm being told that we're really pressed on time, so we need to wrap it up and end. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, our attendees. Thank you, Lucy, our excellent tech support. And I hope everyone has an excellent rest of the Balticon, and you feel free to continue this on the Discord channel. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.